Edogawa Rampo, the human chair. Every morning, after Yoshiko saw her husband off at work, which was always after 10 a.m., she would finally get alone and retreat to the study she shared with her husband in the Western-style building. There, she was working on a long piece of creative writing for the summer issue of K magazine. As a beautiful female writer, she had become so well known by now that her husband, a secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, seemed to have been overshadowed. She received letters from unknown admirers on a daily basis. This morning, as she sat at her desk in her study, she had to first read through these letters from unknown people before beginning her work. They were all cliched and boring, but out of a woman's kindness, she would read through any letter addressed to her, no matter what it was. After reading 2 sealed letters and a postcard, she was left with a bulky, manuscript-like letter. Although I had not received any letter of notification, I had often received manuscripts like this out of the blue. They were often long and tedious, but she decided to take a look anyway. So she opened the envelope and took out the stack of papers inside. It was, as she had expected, bound manuscript paper. But somehow, without a title or signature, it suddenly began with the word "Dear," which was an invocation. Strange then. Is it a letter after all? She thought so, and as she casually ran her eyes over 2 or 3 lines, she had a premonition of something unusual and strangely creepy, and her natural curiosity made her read on and on. "Dear Madam, please forgive me. I have sinned in sending you this letter from a man whom you do not even know. I am about to confess to you the most mysterious sins I have committed in the world. For several months I have been living a truly demonic life, completely hidden from the human world. Of course, no one in the whole wide world knows of my deeds. If nothing had happened to me, I might never have returned to the human world. Recently, however, a strange change has occurred in my heart, and I cannot help but repent for my actions. I know that there may be some points that you may find suspicious if I just write like this, but please read this letter to the end. If you do so, you will be able to understand why I felt the way I did. It will also become clear to you why I must ask you to listen to this confession. Now, where should I begin? It is a fact so remote from human nature and so bizarre that it is difficult to write in the manner of letters used in the human world, and I find my pen dull. However, there is no use in being lost. Anyway, let me start from the beginning of the story and write it down in order. I was born with the most hideous appearance in the world. Please remember this clearly. Otherwise, if you accept this impolite request and come to see me, it would be unbearable for me to be seen by you without any prior knowledge that my face, which is ugly even in itself, has been so badly disfigured by a long and unhealthy life that it cannot be seen for the second time. What an unfortunate man I am. Despite my hideous appearance, inside my heart, I was secretly burning with passions. I was longing for sweet, luxurious, and various dreams without knowing how much I was worth, forgetting the reality that I was just a craftsman with a monstrous face and a very poor one. If I had been born into a richer family, money would have enabled me to indulge in all sorts of amusements to distract me from the absurdity of my ugliness. Or if I had been given more artistic talents, I might have been able to forget the tastelessness of the world by writing beautiful poems, for example. But I, the unfortunate child of a craftsman, had to make do with what I had inherited from my parents and live with it day by day. My job was to make a variety of chairs. Even the most demanding client was sure to be pleased with the chairs I made. So people in the industry paid me special respect and gave me a lot of good work. When it came to such a high-quality product, there were various difficult instructions for the carving of the backrest and armrests, and delicate preferences were required for the cushioning and dimensions of each part. But the more effort I put into it, the happier I am when it is finished. It may sound like a big thing to say, but I think this feeling can be compared to the joy an artist feels when he or she completes a magnificent work of art. When a chair is finished, I first sit on it myself to test its comfort. Only then do I feel an indescribable sense of happiness, despite the tastelessness of my life as a craftsman. I imagine what kind of noble person or what kind of beautiful person would sit there. And since the mansion was so generous as to order such a magnificent chair, it must have a luxurious room that would be suitable for this chair. The walls would be covered with oil paintings by famous artists, and a large jewel-like chandelier would hang from the ceiling. The floor would be covered with expensive carpets, and on the table in front of this chair, Western flowers and grasses would be in full bloom, emitting a sweet fragrance that would awaken the eyes. When I indulge in such fantasies, I feel as if I were the owner of this magnificent room, and for a brief moment, I feel an indescribable sense of joy. My fleeting fantasies grow unceasingly. In my fantasy world, I, a poor, ugly craftsman, am a noble nobleman sitting on a magnificent chair that I have made. And beside me, my beautiful lover, who always appears in my dreams, is smiling and listening to my story. Not only that, in my fantasies, I even hold hands with her and whisper sweet words of love to each other. However, as is always the case, my fluffy purple dream is immediately interrupted by the noisy chatter of the neighborhood women and the hysterical wailing of the babies, and once again, the ugly reality reveals its gray, swollen body before me. Back in reality, I find myself pitifully ugly, nothing like the nobleman of my dream. And that beautiful woman who smiled at me earlier is, where in the world can I find such a woman? Not even the filthy babysitters playing in the dust around the corner, who won't even give me a second glance. Only the chair I made remains there, like a remnant of the dream I mentioned earlier. But that chair will soon be carried away to a place completely different from me. I am struck with an indescribable sense of tastelessness with each chair I finish. As the months went by, this indescribable, unpleasant feeling became more and more unbearable for me. I seriously thought to myself, if I have to continue living like a maggot, I might as well just die. I would think about this obsessively in the workshop while working hard with a hammer, hammering nails, or kneading strong paints. But is there anything more I can do than to make up my mind to die? I was thinking about the horrors of the situation. At that time, I was asked to make a large leather armchair, something I had never done before. This chair was to be delivered to a hotel run by a foreigner in Y City. Originally, it was to be ordered from that country, but the association I belonged to was active and insisted that there were chair makers in Japan who were as good as those imported from abroad, and I was able to obtain the order. For this reason, I devoted myself to the production of the chairs, forgetting about sleep and food. I really put my heart and soul into my work. When I saw the finished chair, I felt a satisfaction that I had never felt before. It was a magnificent piece of workmanship that I could not help but admire. As usual, I took one of the 4 pairs of chairs out into the sunny boardroom and sat down comfortably. How comfortable it was. The cushions are neither too hard nor too soft. The tanned leather is deliberately not dyed and left in a gray material. The backrest is sloped at an appropriate angle to gently support my back, and the delicately curved armrests on either side are all in mysterious harmony. All of them seem to be in a strange harmony, and as a whole they seem to express the word comfort as it is. I sank deeply into the armrests, caressing the rounded armrests with both hands, entranced. Then, as is my habit, my endless fantasies began to well up one after another, with dazzling colors like a 7-colored rainbow. I wonder if they are called illusions. The thoughts in my mind came so clearly to my mind's eye that I began to fear that I might be losing my mind. Then a wonderful thought came to my mind. I thought that the devil's whispering probably meant that. It was as ridiculous as a dream and very eerie. But the eeriness of it all intrigued me with an ineffable fascination. At first, it was just a simple wish that I would not let go of the beautiful chair that I had put my heart and soul into, and that I would follow it wherever it took me, if I could. As I was spreading the wings of my imagination, it somehow became connected to a terrible idea that had been brewing in my mind for some time. And what a madman I was. I decided to actually go through with this bizarre fantasy. I hastily dismantled in detail the armchair I thought was the best made of the 4 armchairs. Then I reassembled it to suit the execution of my strange plan. It is a very large armchair, so the part on which it rests is upholstered in leather so that it almost touches the floor. And the backrest and armrest are so thick that inside there is a large cavity in which a person could hide and not be seen from the outside. Of course, it has a solid wooden frame and many springs attached to it, but I worked on them to create enough space for a person to sit in it, with knees in the seat, neck and torso in the backrest. and just enough room for a person to sit in the chair shape. I am very good at this kind of work, so I made it very handy and efficient. For example, I made an opening in a part of the leather that could be seen from the outside in order to breathe and hear noises from the outside. And I placed a small shelf inside the backrest, right next to the head, so that something could be stored there, such as a water bottle or a loaf of army-grade bread. For some purposes, large rubber bags were provided, and various other devices were devised so that, as long as there was food, one could stay in the chair for 2 or 3 days and never feel inconvenienced. In other words, the chair became a room for one person. Once I was shirtless, I opened the doorway lid on the side of the chair and slipped into the chair. I felt really strange. It was dark, suffocating, and strange, as if I had entered a grave. As soon as I crawled into the chair, I would disappear from the human world, just like wearing a cover. Soon after, a worker from the wholesaler arrived with a large cart to pick up the 4 armchairs. My inner disciple, I was living with the man, he doesn't know anything about it and is talking to the workers. As we were loading it into the car, one of the men yelled, "This thing is ridiculously heavy," which startled me in my chair. But I was not worried about being mistaken because the armchair itself is inherently very heavy. Soon the rattling vibration of the cart sent a kind of strange sensation through my body. I was very worried. But in the end, nothing happened, and by that afternoon, the armchair in which I had been sitting was set up in a hotel room. I found out later that it was not a private room, but a room that was used by people waiting for others, reading newspapers, smoking cigarettes, etc. It was what you might call a lounge. As you may have already noticed, the primary purpose of this strange act of mine was to sneak out of the chair and prowl in the hotel, stealing things when no one was around. Who would have thought that a person could be hiding in a chair? I could roam from room to room at will like a shadow, and when people start to make noise, I can just run back to my hiding place in the chair and watch their dumb search from the corner of my eye. You are probably familiar with the hermit crab, a type of crab that can be found along the shores of the ocean. It is shaped like a large spider, and when there are no enemies around it, it wanders about the area as if it owned the place. Then they will stick out their hairy paws a little from their shells, waiting to see if their enemies were moving. I was just that hermit crab. Instead of a shell, I had a chair, a hiding place, and I was walking in the hotel, not on the beach, as if I owned the place. My crazy plan, as crazy as it was, went beyond people's expectations and succeeded brilliantly. By the third day after arriving at the hotel, I had already done a lot of work. The frightening yet joyful feeling I had when it came time to steal, the indescribable happiness I felt when I succeeded, and the funny feeling I had watching all the people right under my nose, making a big fuss over there and over there. What a strange fascination that must have held for me. But I do not have time now, unfortunately, to tell you about it in detail. I have discovered a strange pleasure there that pleases me 10 or 20 times more than such theft. And that is, in fact, the real purpose of this letter, to confess it to you. I must return to the story before us and begin with the time when my chair was placed in the lounge of the hotel. When the chair arrived, a hotel employee came to check the comfort of the chair, but after that, the room was quiet. Not a sound was heard. But I was too scared to get out of the chair as soon as I arrived. For a very long time, or maybe it just felt like that long, I kept my eyes and ears open, trying to hear even the slightest noise. After a while, I heard heavy footsteps, probably coming from the hallway. As they approached 3 or 4 meters away, they were replaced by a low, almost inaudible sound due to the carpet in the room. But soon I heard a rough snort from the man, and before I knew it, a large Western-like body fell into my lap and flopped a couple of times. My thighs were separated by a thin layer of tanning leather, and they were so close together that I could feel the warmth of his buttocks. His broad shoulders leaned just to my chest, his heavy hands overlapping mine across the leather. And I imagine the man is puffing on a cigarette. A rich, masculine fragrance wafts through the leather. Imagine, madam, if you were in my position, what the scene would be like. What a strange scene. I was so terrified that I was in a daze, cowering tightly in the darkness of my chair, cold sweat dripping down my armpits, unable to think or do anything else. Starting with this man, throughout the day, various people came and went to sit on my lap, And not one of them had the slightest idea that I was there, that what they believed to be a soft cushion was in fact my own human thigh, my own flesh and blood. It was dark and I couldn't move. How strange and fascinating is this world? In this world, human beings seem to be strange creatures, completely different from the people we see with our eyes every day. They are nothing more than a voice, a snort, a footstep, the sound of shifting clothes, and a few round, resilient lumps of flesh. I can identify each and every one of them by their texture instead of their appearance. Some feel to me like fat, rotten fish. On the other hand, some are so thin and calloused that they give me the feeling of a hunchback. I also look at the curvature of the spine, the opening of the shoulder bones, the length of the arms, the thickness of the thighs, the length of the tailbone, etc. All of these points taken together make even the most similarly built person different in some way. In addition to appearance and fingerprints, a human being can be completely distinguished by the feel of his or her entire body. The same is true for the opposite sex. In the normal case, we would judge a person primarily by his or her appearance. But in the world inside the chair, this is not the issue at all. There are only naked bodies, voices, and smells. Please do not be offended, madam, by my overly blunt description. One woman, she was the first to sit in my chair, and I felt an intense attachment to her body. From the sound of her voice, I imagine it was a foreign woman, still young. She came into the room with dancing steps, singing a strange song in a whisper, as if she had something to be happy about. She walked up to the armchair where I was hiding, and suddenly threw her voluptuous yet very supple body over mine. What's more, she suddenly burst out laughing, flapping her arms and legs and flopping around like a fish in a net. For almost half an hour after that, she sat on my lap, singing a song from time to time and moving her heavy body, twisting and turning as if in tune with the song. This was truly an unexpected and astonishing experience for me. I had always considered women to be sacred, or even more frightening, and had refrained from even looking at their faces. Now here I was in the same room, on the same chair, with a foreign maiden whom I did not even know. And not only that, I was so close to her that I could feel the warmth of her skin against a thin piece of tanned leather. Nevertheless, she was not anxious, but rather she was moving freely, with the weight of her entire body resting on me, feeling safe and secure without anyone watching. I can mimic holding her in my chair. I can kiss her voluptuous neck from behind her skin. I am free to do whatever I want. After making this amazing discovery, I put aside stealing, which had been my first goal, and simply immersed myself in the world of this strange sensation. I thought to myself, this is it. This world inside the chair was my true home. An ugly and feeble man like me would have to continue living a shameful and miserable life, always feeling inferior in the bright and luminous world. However, if only I could change the world in which I live and persevere in the cramped conditions of my chair, I would be able to approach a beautiful person and hear her voice and touch her skin, something I would not be allowed to do in the bright world, let alone speak to her or even approach her. Love in a chair. One only has to have actually been in a chair to understand how magical and intoxicating it can be. It is a love of touch, hearing, and a little bit of smell. It is a love in a dark world. It is not of this world. This is the lust of the devil's kingdom, is it not? When you think about it, it is truly unimaginable how many strange and terrible things are going on in the hidden corners of this world. Of course, my original plan was to leave the hotel as soon as I had achieved my goal of stealing. But I became so absorbed in the bizarre pleasures of the world that instead of running away, I continued to live in my chair as my permanent residence. I took great care when I went out at night to avoid making even the slightest noise or being seen, so naturally I was in no danger. It was truly astonishing to me that I had lived in the chair for several long months without finding anything. I was so paralyzed by the cramped confines of the chair, arms bent and knees folded, that I was unable to stand completely upright, and even crawled on my hands and feet on the floor to and from the kitchen and restrooms. What a crazy man I was. Even after enduring so much pain, I could not bring myself to abandon the world of mysterious sensations. Some people stayed there for a month or two as if it were their home, but it was a hotel by nature, and guests were constantly coming and going. So I couldn't help but notice that my strange love was changing over time. And the memories of these strange lovers are imprinted on my mind, not by their appearance, as is usually the case, but mainly by their physical form. Some were as fearless and lithe as a pony, some were as bewitching as a snake, with a body that moved freely and flexibly. Some were as fat as a rubber ball, rich in fat and elasticity, and some were as stout, strong, and developed as a Greek sculpture. Some were fat, and elastic, like rubber. Each woman's body had its own characteristics and charms. As I moved from woman to woman, I also had other strange experiences. One such experience was when the ambassador of a powerful European country, I learned this through the gossip of a Japanese boy, placed his large body on my lap. It was a man who was better known as a world-class poet than as a politician. And for that reason, I felt excited and proud to feel the skin of this great man. He talked over me with 2 or 3 of his countrymen for a good while, and then just walked away. Of course, I have no idea what he was talking about, but the tickling sensation of his body, which seemed warmer than normal, moving with each gesture, gave me a kind of stimulation that is hard to describe. At that time, I suddenly imagined this. If I were to stab him in the heart from behind the leather with a sharp knife, what would be the result? Of course, it would be a mortal wound from which he would never recover. The political world in Japan, as well as in his home country, would be in an uproar for that. The newspapers will run passionate articles. It will have a great impact on the diplomatic relations between Japan and his home country. And from the standpoint of art, his death must be a great loss to the world. Such a major event could be easily realized by a single move of my own. When I thought about this, I could not help but feel a strange sense of accomplishment. Another time, when a famous dancer from a certain country came to Japan, she happened to stay at the hotel and sat in my chair, albeit only once. I was similarly impressed as in the case of the ambassador, but on top of that, she gave me a feeling of ideal physical beauty that I had never experienced before. I had no time to think of anything vulgar about her. I just wanted to admire her with the same reverence that I have for a work of art. I had many other experiences, unusual, strange, or weird, but it is not the purpose of this letter to describe them in detail, and since this is a very long story, I will hurry up and get to the important points. Some months after I arrived at the hotel, a change occurred to me. The owner of the hotel had to leave Japan for some reason, and the hotel was handed over to a Japanese company, leaving it unoccupied. The Japanese company changed its business policy from luxury to a more general-purpose ryokan, and began to manage the hotel in a safe manner. The furniture they no longer needed was sold at auction to a large furniture dealer, and my chair was included in the auction inventory. When I learned of this, I was temporarily discouraged. I was so disappointed that I thought I would use it as an opportunity to return to my hometown and start a new life. By that time, I had accumulated a considerable amount of stolen money, so even if I went out into the world, I would not live as miserably as before. Looking back, leaving the foreigner-owned hotel was, on the one hand, a great disappointment, but on the other hand, it meant a new hope. For several months, I had been in love with various members of the opposite sex, but because they were all foreigners, no matter how desirable their bodies were, I could not understand their thoughts and felt inadequate. After all, a human being cannot feel true love unless he or she can understand the other person's words. I gradually began to think that way. Then my chair went up for auction. Next time, maybe it will be bought by a Japanese person whose language I can understand, and then it might be placed in a Japanese home. That was my new hope. I decided to continue living in the chair for a little while longer. I spent a couple of days in a very difficult situation in a tool store, but when the auction started, happily, my chair soon found a buyer. I think it was because even though it was old, it was still a very nice chair that caught people's attention. The buyer was a bureaucrat who lived in a big city not far from Y City. I was almost killed in the chair when it was transported several kilometers from the tool store to the buyer's residence by a very shaky truck. But that was nothing compared to the joy of knowing that the buyer was Japanese, just as I had hoped. The official buyer was the owner of a rather splendid mansion, and my chair was placed in a large study in a Western-style house there. But to my great satisfaction, the study was used by the young and beautiful lady of the house, rather than by the owner. From then on, for about a month, I stayed with her constantly. Except for her meals and bedtime, Her supple body was always on top of mine. I know how much I loved her because she spent all that time in her study, absorbed in a work of hers. I don't need to go into detail about how much I loved her. She was the first Japanese person I had ever come into contact with, and she had a beautiful body. I felt true love for her. Compared to that, my numerous experiences in hotels should not be called love. The proof of this is clear in the fact that I had never felt such a thing before. But only with her I was not satisfied with merely enjoying secret caresses, and I went to great lengths to make my presence known. I wanted her to be aware of me in the chair if possible. I wanted her to love me. But how could I signal that? If I were to give outright notice that a human being was hiding there, I am sure she would be so surprised that she would tell her master and servants about it. Not only would that ruin everything, but I would have to wear a horrible name and even face legal punishment. So I tried to make her feel at least a little more comfortable and attached to my chair. As an artist, she must have more subtle senses than most people. If she could feel life in my chair, if she could feel attachment to it as a living thing and not just a piece of material, that alone would be enough for me to be satisfied. When she threw herself on me, I tried to receive her as gently as possible. When she got tired on top of me, I moved my knees so that I could shift her body position without her knowing it. And when she began to doze off, I would shake my knees very, very slightly to act as a cradle. Whether it was because of my thoughtfulness or simply my imagination, it seems that these days she is somehow in love with my chair. She sinks into my chair with a sweet tenderness, just like an infant in its mother's arms or a woman in her lover's embrace. And the way she moves her body in my lap, she seems to miss me. In this way, my passion burned fiercely day after day. And finally, oh madam, finally I began to have a wild wish that I did not know how to make. I even thought that if I could only see my lover's face and exchange a few words with her, I would be willing to die. Of course, you must have realized this by now, madam. Please forgive me for being so rude, but my lover is, in fact, it is you. I am a poor man who has been in love with you ever since your husband bought my chair at the Y City Market store. I beg you, madam, for my life. Will you not see me just once, and even a single word of comfort to this poor, ugly man? I am too ugly and dirty to wish for more than that. Please listen to the earnest wishes of this unfortunate man. I left the residence last night to write this letter. It is both very dangerous and impossible for me to ask this of you face to face. And by the time you read this letter now, I will be pacing around the mansion, looking pale with worry. If you would be so kind as to grant my request, please place your handkerchief on the potted petal in your study window, and I will take that as my cue to come to the entrance of your mansion as a casual visitor. The mysterious letter concluded with a fervent prayer. When Yoshiko read the middle of the letter, she was already blue with fearful foreboding. Then unconsciously she got up, ran out of the study with its creepy armchair, and came to the living room of the Japanese-style house. She thought about tearing up the last part of the letter without reading it, but she was so anxious that she continued reading it anyway on the small desk in the living room. Her hunch was right. What a horrifying fact. In that armchair she sat in every day, there was a man, a stranger. Oh, that's just creepy. She felt a chill as if cold water had been splashed down her back. She felt a strange shiver run down her spine, and it didn't stop for a long time. She was so out of it that she had no idea what to do about it. Examine the chair. She can't do that creepy thing. Even if there were no more human beings in there, there might still be food and other filthy things attached to him. Miss Yoshiko, I have a letter for you. She turned around in surprise to find that a maid had brought a letter that had apparently just arrived. Yoshiko unconsciously accepted the letter and was about to open it, but when she looked at the superscription, she was so badly surprised that she took the letter down without thinking. It was addressed to her in handwriting that was not so different from that of the earlier. For a long time she had been debating whether or not to open it. Finally she tore it open and read the contents with trepidation. The letter was very short, but it contained a strange statement that surprised her once again. Please forgive my rudeness in writing to you out of the blue. I am a regular reader of your works. What I have enclosed herewith is my poor creation. I would be more than happy if you could read it and give me your criticism. For some reason, I mailed the manuscript before I wrote this letter, so I assume you have already seen it. What do you think? I would be very happy if I could have impressed you in any way with my work. I intentionally left it out in the manuscript, but I would like to give it the title The Human Chair. Now, if you will excuse me, please, yours sincerely.
Whenever Rampo was asked to sign an autograph, he would always write the following words. The present world is a dream, but the dream of the night is the truth. I think this is a romantic phrase. If this is true, in a way, it is wonderful. However, it is too difficult for me, and I don't think I will ever know if it is true or not. Well, thank you for listening to the end. See you again.